So today I am going to be using the client to demonstrate the different features of import profiles, because that feature is not fully complete in LEAP yet. So when it is added to LEAP, I'll update the documentation and training courses. But for now, any practice that you would like to have on creating import profiles will need to be done with the exercises in the cataloging in the client course. So I know that some new staff already have their existing import profiles that you can use and don't need to create new ones frequently. Since it's not a frequent task, I will be reviewing how to create the import profiles and which profiles are important to have, and then you can practice on your own after the session. So after that, I will be reviewing the different settings in the profile and how they function, and I'll import a file for a brief demonstration, and then I will point out the important features of the import reports and different types of error messages that you will see and should watch out for. So now I'm going to share my screen. One moment, please. I have the training server open today. And I'm going to begin with a demonstration on how to access those profiles. So to find the profiles, they are under the Utilities drop-down menu. And then you can hover over Importing and then open the Profile Manager. So in the Profile Manager, this opens to a screen that has a filter by the creator name. So to see all of the filters available, all of the profiles available, you can click on the word all. So if you scroll through these and take a look at some of them, you'll see that this has profiles that were created by Polaris. So those will say Polaris exec as examples. And there are many profiles that were created by CCS staff. And then there are other profiles created by staff at the different libraries. So it's much easier to find your profile if you begin the name with the 3-letter library code. And some of them do have the names of the libraries, but the 3-letter code will be fine. So as you do look through the profiles, if there's something that interests you, there are some different variations other than the templates. You'll see that there are some for different formats. There are separate profiles for the on order and final records. And some libraries even have different profiles for the different vendors. So you can see here that Niles has separate profiles for their different vendors. So a common question that I hear from staff is if there should be an import profile for every vendor. This is not necessary. Some libraries like to do that, but you don't have to. However, it is important to have different on-order import profiles for the different formats if you have vendor records. So you need at least one on-order profile for books and one for AV materials. Catalogers will also need one profile, or at least one profile, for importing OCLC records. So an easy way to find the profiles, if you're new and you'd like practice copying the profiles, is to scroll down to the words template to copy. These are the profiles that CCS staff created for you to copy. So as I said, you won't need all of them. You won't need all 5 of these. The ones that you will need will depend on your workflow. So the first one is AV vendor on order records. This and profile as well as the book vendor on order records are the profiles that should be used with vendor records that have the 970 field output to the record. The 970 field is used to add data to purchase order line items when titles are bulk added to the purchase order. So these profiles are used by the libraries that use the acquisitions module. This data is then added to the item records when they are created at the time the purchase order is released. There are separate profiles for these types of materials because there are different standard numbers like ISBNs and UPCs that are added to the record. I'm going to open up this AV profile so you can take a look at it. So down here at the bottom, you can see that we have added a profile for tags to retain. For the AV profile, we retain the UPC, a publisher number, and a stock number. And this differs from the book vendor profile because we only need to retain an ISBN number for the book vendor profile. But for both of these, it retains the 970 field. There is another profile here for on order records called on order with item creation. This profile can be used by the libraries that do not use the acquisitions module, but it can also be used by libraries that have a different workflow for standing orders. And this differs because they use the item records tab to create the item record at the time the record is imported. So if you create the item records at the time your purchase order is released, you would not want to use this profile. So this is beneficial if your library does output a tag from your vendor by using grids online to your on order records. Some libraries use the 852 field, but you don't have to use the 852 field. If you take a look at Algonquin's profile, they use the 970 field for item creation, but do not use the acquisitions module. However, if your library doesn't want to output the data to the records from your vendor, you could actually just use the item template. You can choose an item template for a default and not output the data from your vendor records. The next profile that I'm going to show you is the OCLC full record import. This is the one that catalogers will use to import full records from OCLC. So this one is set up so that the full records overlay the on order records and doesn't need any of the tags retained in the profile like the on order records. So this only retains the system defined retention tags. So I'll talk a bit more about that later. You'll also see this one called Enriched EDI Orders. There are only 2 libraries that I know of that used Enriched EDI. These are Indian Trails and Evanston. So you don't need to copy this profile at all if you're not using Enriched EDI. And these libraries receive final records with a 949 tag in it that are used to update their existing item records with information like their barcode when these files are imported. So it's an interesting workflow, but it's only necessary if you're getting your final records from your vendor as part of that enriched EDI order process. So there are some other interesting profiles you'll see here, like Indian Trails profiles. They have some OCLC, full record import profiles with item creation. And this could be useful for a standing order workflow. If you decide to not create your item records at the time your purchase order is released, when you are processing your incoming standing orders, or for that matter, any orders from vendors that do not provide you with on-order records, like from Amazon, then one option for your workflow could be to create item records at the time your full record is imported from OCLC. So some libraries like to output their 949 fields to your OCLC records using the macro. But if you didn't want to do that, you could just use an item template and not set up a 949 field. So are there any questions about the profiles that I covered so far? You can type it in chat or unmute yourself if you have any questions. And feel free to ask me to slow down and go over something again if I start talking too fast. All right, so now I'm just going to briefly review how to copy that profile. So it's a fairly easy process. If you right click on the template, you can see that you can just press copy. And you can then change the name to the name that you'd like it to be. If you do decide to update the profile and customize it, you can change the description of the profile. You can also add in a default file location by clicking on Browse and then finding your file. For the profiles that are used through the client, you do need to either use a network drive or a USB drive for your default file. That has not been, or the default option hasn't been added to Leap yet. Hopefully that will be added to soon. But one thing that is different about Leap is that because it's online and not via the remote server, you do not have to use that networked drive. So there are instructions for setting up that network drive if you haven't done that yet in the agenda that I sent out. But if you start importing files through Leap, you'll just be able to import your file from anywhere on your computer, and you don't have to network that drive. So to save your profile, all you do is press save. And that saves a copy of the profile. And so now I'm going to review each of the different settings. on the Bibliographic Records tab. The Bibliographic Records tab can be a bit confusing, especially understanding how the duplicate detection settings work. So at the top is the bibliographic save options. Our default is to save all records as final. We do not want to save the records as provisional because that will give you some more work to do. Provisional records are actually not indexed in the pack, so you can't search for them and patrons can't search for them. And so you will need to look at them and then press save or use a bulk change option to save them as final, which is why we want to save them as final as much as possible. The default for displaying in the pack is to check that immediately when it's imported. Then once the item has been added to the bibliographic record, it will be visible and searchable in the pack. The owner is always going to be Cooperative Computer Services at the system level. It has SYS in parentheses. We also have settings for deleting mark tags on incoming records. Our default is to use the system-defined deletion tags because there's a lot of data in those records that we don't need to keep, like odd vendor codes that you might see. So if you are interested in the list of system-defined deletion tags, I did include a link to that list in the agenda. It's also going to be in the handout that I will send to you after the session. Below the bibliographic save options are the options that are only used for final records when they are imported from OCLC or from vendors that provide final records via the Enriched EDI service. So for final records, we do recommend performing Mark 21 validation, ignoring the errors, and saving the record as final. So when doing so, this outputs information to your import report if it does find an error, but it will not prevent that record from being saved as final if there's an error. But it can be useful to see those error messages in case something does need to be fixed. And the next setting is to perform authority control. And when doing so, it does not create an authority record, but it will save the bibliographic record as final. So we do not want it to be saved as provisional. So you will see a lot of error messages when they do find headings that do not match an authority record. So if you're unfamiliar with authority records, they are records in our database for every subject heading, every author, and every series title. So there are a lot of subject headings that do not have authority records because they have so many different subdivisions. When you see a subject heading that has a dash and then fiction or drama after that. So you'll see a lot of those appearing in your import report, and you can ignore those. However, if a cataloger does find that there is a new author that doesn't have a record for their name, or a new series title that doesn't have a record, then you are welcome to contact the help desk and ask Virginia to create that record for you if you are not certified to create it via NACO certification. However, if you're NACO certified, you are welcome to create that heading yourself. And the bottom section is for duplicate detection. Our default is to always perform duplicate detection using the system-defined duplicate detection rules. There's also a link to an image that will give you an idea of what those duplicate detection rules are. It's not the greatest image because there's some text that's cut off, but it's very complex. So it'll just give you a general idea of how that works and what duplicate detection rules they're looking at, or what Polaris is looking at when it automatically looks for duplicates. And underneath that are the save options for what Polaris should do when that duplicate is found. So this will vary depending on the type of record. It's different for on-order records and full-level records. So for on-order records, when it comes from the vendor, we want as many records to merge as possible, but there are times when libraries have found that it's better not to merge records, so they do change their settings and have a separate profile just for multi-volume set records that saves the incoming record as provisional or saves the incoming record as final without replacing the database record. And then they merge those multi-volume set records manually after they've already created the purchase orders. But for most on-order vendor records, the default is to reject the incoming record if it's a duplicate and add the mark retention tags. So these are the profile defined tags that are listed in this profile, the 970 and the standard numbers. So for final records coming from OCLC, just going to close the profile here and find another profile to open. 1 second. So for the final records coming from OCLC, the default is to save the incoming record as final and replace the database record, because it's important to overlay those on-order records as much as possible, so you do not have to manually do that. And then it does have system-defined retention tags that are retained. And there is a link to the list of the system-defined retention tags that is in that agenda and the handout that I will be giving you. However, the enriched EDI order records, 1 second, do have a different option that is best. Oh, it's not letting me change this. 1 second. Okay, there we go. So this is an interesting option that is best for the enriched EDI vendor orders. But you could use it for OCLC records as well. Oh, that just deleted it by accident. So let me open that again, because I just accidentally changed something. Okay, so I've updated the production version of this template, but didn't update the training server version, so I need to do that. This is an interesting option to save the record with the highest encoding level. If the encoding level matches, it should reject the incoming record and save the mark retention tags. So what this means is that the encoding level is in a fixed field called the leader. And this tells you if the record is a full level record or less than full level record. So Polaris will look at it and see that the existing record in the database is full level or less than full, and it will overlay it if the encoding level is less than full. But if the encoding level is full level and the vendor record is also full level, then it will reject that incoming record, but add in those retention tags from the vendor, like the 949 field that will be used to update the existing item record. So it is something that you may want to do also for OCLC records, but it's not necessary because I know that when you're cataloging and bringing in those OCLC records, you should already be in the habit of looking to see if the existing record is full level or not, so that you don't have to do that work. But when the enriched EDI records come in, those are full level records from the vendor, and that's why it's important to look at that encoding level. And since there's many records coming in at a time, this helps to not overlay the existing work that another cataloger has already done. And so this one is the on order record with item creation that you could use if you do not use the acquisitions module. This one rejects the incoming record, but retains the system defined overlay retention tags. So this does not have the profile for the 970 because it's not always added to the records if you don't use the vendor records from the vendors with the 970 field in it. But you could update that if you do want to output the vendor provided data to your grid to create the item records. And you do have that option to just use the item template instead. So this is a good example of the item records tab. This allows you to build item records from a field output to your on order record, or if you wanted to do it to with your full level records, you could. This does check for duplicate item records. And it will have the option that if it finds a duplicate item record, it can save it as provisional, or it rejects the item record creation settings. It also checks to see if your data in your field has a barcode. If no barcode is found, you can choose to save the item as final, provisional, or not to save it. So if you are not outputting these holdings tags, you could just save the item record as final if you're using the default template or item template. So here is one, let's see, where's Algonquin? I was going to find Algonquins. This is a good example of one from Algonquin. they are using the vendor on order records, outputting data to a 970 field, but they're not using the acquisitions module. So they are creating their item records at the time their on order records are imported. So one other tab that is important for you to familiarize yourself with is the Record Sets tab. Record sets are important so that you can easily find your records when you import them. You can change your name and owner to your library's owner. So you will need, for your bibliographic records, your final and provisional record sets. And if you also create item records at the time your record is imported, you'll also need an item record set. Are there any questions that you have on the importing settings that I just covered? And feel free to tell me that I'm going too fast if you need me to slow down. Cassie asks, will this be the same once we switch over to Leap? Yes, the import profiles will function in the same manner. The only thing that is different is that you'll be able to import your file from anywhere on your computer. You won't need to use a USB drive or that network drive location anymore. I'm not sure when the additional updates will be done. So right now you can import records to Leap if you'd like. You just have to be able to use the express import. So if you needed to switch settings or change your item template, you would not be able to do that. In Leap, you can only change the item template in the client right now. So hopefully that will be updated soon. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to briefly demonstrate importing a record. This is going to be an on order record, and then it will be a good way to show the workflow of how you can access your import report. So I'm going to use Express Import. And I will choose, let's see. I'll use this Evanston profile. And I have my drive networked right here, so I'll find a file. And I'll import that. So as it's importing it, it will, you'll see this pop up saying that the jobs queue will open and allow you to track your status. So this is the import jobs queue. And you can press refresh if you see that it's still pending. So it's just 2 records, so it shouldn't take too long to do. So one moment. I do want this one to import so that you can see some messages for duplicates. Okay, so now it's running. And it's completed. Okay, so you can just double click on that job to open your import report. It's a bit slow today. There it is. Brenda asks if I could explain the difference between express import and full import. So express import does not allow you to change all of the settings. So I'm going to click on that. And if I click on the bibliographic records tab, you can see that all of these are grayed out. All you'd be able to change is display and pack and record set settings. But if you use full import, you can change any settings on any of the tabs. So right now in Leap, all you have are the express import settings. So you'd be able to change the display and pack settings and the record set settings. So this is the import report. I think it's a really great idea for everyone to familiarize yourself with the different messages you can see in the report. So at the top of the import report, it will display all of the settings of your import profile. And then on page 2, it will list each of your records. It will provide you with your bibliographic record ID. We'll tell you the record status. So you can see this was saved as final, and the second one here was saved as provisional. And then there will be a number of different messages, like messages telling you how, if it was rejected or if there were duplicates, and if there were errors. So this message says it retained the tags from the rejected record and added 4 tags to the bibliographic record. But with this one, there are already 2 bibliographic records that were never merged in the system. And when this happens, Polaris doesn't know how to overlay any duplicates because it wouldn't be able to decide which one to overlay. So it saves it as provisional. And it gives you a list of the duplicates. And here's an example of some of the other odd warnings that you can see, like if there's problems with mark validation. It says like tag 40 subfield, record 1 was invalid. So you'll see some odd things like that. And you can see that there was a record in the file that was rejected. And below that are the record sets. So then you can easily just copy the record set name, open the record set to find the record. And they will tell you the number of records that are in the final record set and the provisional record set. And then below that are the import statistics. So you will see how many records were updated, provisional, and rejected from this. So there were a total of 2 records in the final, and it only created 1 record. Okay, so I want to now switch to a PowerPoint presentation. So I need to switch screens that I'm sharing. Oh, 1 moment. Okay, so can everyone see my PowerPoint presentation? Okay, great. So after the session today, I will be sending you this PowerPoint presentation. It does have a section of some FAQs. Some of it I already went over, like how to access your import profiles, which templates you need, provisional records, and the links to bibliographic tags that are retained and deleted, and duplicate rules. And I also want to review some of the other common error messages you'll see in import reports. So this is the one that I already showed you from that import report when I imported the file. This is the example of error messages that you'll see when they import a record that's found as a duplicate and the imported record is ignored and rejected. So you can see that this error message says that the record was rejected. And this is the error message that you'll see, and the warnings that you'll see when there are too many duplicates. And Polaris does not know how to merge those duplicates, so it saves that record as provisional. So at times there can be different ISBNs and USBCs in the record. Like one record will have one ISBN and another record will have another ISBN. And if you, let's say if you opened this bottom one, and these 2 ISBNs or UPCs could be different for some reason, but they still come up as matches. And you try to duplicate it by opening one that has a missing ISBN or UPC, you won't find all of the records coming up with the duplicate detection settings. So it's really important to be able to look at the import report to find these duplicate records and make sure that you caught all of them while you were deduplicating. So this is not an error message. However, there are times when staff accidentally use the wrong import profile. So you can see that the profile used is for a different library. This is HPK for Highland Park than for the branch that was importing the records, Grays Lake. So this can cause some problems, like if you used a full level record import profile to import the on order records, the on order records would overlay final records. So if this happens, please do contact the help desk so that I can help you sort out that issue and make sure that we get those final records imported again. This is another case of the wrong profile being used to import records. In this case, there is an error message, and this is specifically because an enriched EDI profile was used. Since most of you don't have enriched EDI services, hopefully we won't ever use the wrong profile. And these error messages basically say that there was a missing purchase order line item segment in the records. So in this case, the enriched EDI profile was used for a non-EDI vendor. And the error messages basically say that it could not update the item records and the invoices or create invoices because the wrong profile was used. So whenever there are error messages that occur, especially for the duplicates, it's important to check how many final and provisional records were saved. And you will find that number in that record set section in the bottom. So even though a profile doesn't state that provisional records should be created, Polaris will save a lot of records as provisionals when it can't choose to duplicate or can't choose which records to overlay when a duplicate is found, or if there are other error messages that occur. And there could be at times just an odd glitch because of those error messages. So you will need to review those records and make sure that you save them as final and deduplicate them manually. So are there any questions about what I've covered today? Cassie says, should we be saving the import reports? You do not have to save them on your computer because you can always access them on through the client. So these have, let's see, this is many months. Looks like more than a year of profiles, maybe up to 2 years. Well, up to 2 years of reports. So if you do need to access a profile later on, what you can do is to look at a bibliographic record. I'm just going to open a random record here. And if you click on this icon for the hand holding a card.
We can't see it.
Oh, oops, sorry. I need to save my, I need to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this icon at the top is for properties. It's like a little hand holding a card. And if you click on the About section, you can see the import overlay date and the import file name. So this one's an old one, so we wouldn't be able to find that import report to see what happened. But if you caught something within like the last year and it hadn't been overlaid by anyone else, you'd be able to find that import report and the file name. So I definitely have found that useful in case odd things happen, like merges that are found later on and were accidentally merged. They asked how often should we delete the record set that was created from the import profile. you can delete it whenever you feel like you don't need it anymore. So it is very helpful, mostly for how Simply Reports works in order to delete record sets as much as possible, because there are reports that can be run through Simply Reports in which you select a record set name. So if there are too many record sets that are available, then Simply Reports freezes when you try to select the record set name. So it is helpful for Polaris if you can delete as many record sets as possible when you're not using them anymore. Is there any other questions? Well, thank you for coming to today's webinar on import reports and import profiles. I am going to paste a link to a survey. We'd really like to hear what you thought of today's webinar so that we can improve our training options for CCS libraries. And if you have any further questions or need help with your import reports or import profiles, please do contact me via the help desk anytime. I'm happy to make any additional appointments if you need to see any further demonstrations or to provide you with any assistance I can via the help desk. So have a good day. Oh, and one more link. I have a link to the PowerPoint presentation. I will also post that in the chat. And I'll email that out to you.